sending the markets into a tailspin with a downgrade of America's credit rating to issues of diversity in SA. Dr. Jan Mentz, Academic Dean at Belgium campus iTversity, is our first guest on the show this evening. He is discussing the intersection of diversity and sustainability in the data space. This conversation comes as we celebrate Women's Month in the country. Well, Doctor, it is a privilege to have you speaking to us on the Business Hour. Before we get into that intersection of diversity and sustainability, I thought I would focus on where do we stand in terms of diversity in the ICT sector, particularly with respect to gender parity.
Unfortunately, I don't know that it's a worldwide problem, but it does seem to be a South African and potentially African problem, is that we could say that it's still fairly male-dominated. Bit of a weird angle to use, I think, in the day and age we're living in, because our youth, I think, is trying to get away from a binary, gender-based role kind of thing, which is an interesting component of this conversation. But I would say where we stand at the moment, I see that in our student numbers, it's not just with us, but also across South Africa, is that it still seems to be IT, computer science, and so forth, seems to be something that's potentially more interested or well represented on the male side and less so on the female side. So, unfortunately, it seems to be male-dominated, although that sounds like a very charged claim to make.
What would you say are the factors that are leading to this phenomena that you're witnessing? Because one would argue we're seeing a lot more, ICT leaders pop up on the media landscape, the international media landscape in particular. So one would assume that there's a lot more interest from women to join the sector.
I think we're sitting with multiple aspects. In short, I don't think it's something in our African context, I think that we very well understand. I think it's something that maybe touches on culture, some history, I don't know. So I don't think it's completely well understood. So I can speculate. I think for me, in my career, what I've seen is that there's a potential of early exposure to technology, to IT as a career, even computer science or even engineering as a career. It would seem as though our girls, on some level of their school education, either implicitly or explicitly gets told that things are harder and girls don't do hard things. Now, whether that's true or not, I can't really say, but it does seem to be that there is an implicit dissuading of our girls to enter STEM type topics, which is interesting because I think we have at school level our top performers often being girls rather than boys. I would say it's exposure, early exposure.
Well, Doctor, in what ways can diversity inject sustainability in the ICT space? And certainly in all of these data centers that are coming up or being built.
Yeah, I think there's two answers to that question. On the one hand, there's sort of a traditional answer. The traditional answer, which I'm not convinced is completely appropriate anymore, goes towards if we encourage more females to join this line of work, perhaps we enter into a different way of thinking. Now, personally, I'm uncomfortable with that because that would suggest that males and females are fundamentally different in the way that they think. I'm not convinced is how our youth will argue. That's the sort of traditional answer. But I think where we're sitting is that diversity means we're opening up the workforce to more inclusivity. Who knows what talents we're going to get from saying, well, it's not just one portion of our workforce that we want to work in a data center. Let everybody come. Let us have the full spectrum of talents, and I would like to say passions as well in that field. So it's just, for me, it's practical in the sense that we open it up and we have then the full workforce interested in going at. Surely that brings a more sustainable pool of workers rather than just looking at one portion.
Well, thank you so much, Professor. How do we go about, encouraging more young women to join the ICT sector?
Well, I think we need to show all of our kids what it really is, the interesting and exciting part of working with technology. Now, the reality we're facing is that whether we like it or not, these data centers are becoming the cornerstones, if you like, of many economies in the world. Everything works on data. So it has to be stored and processed and secured and whatnot somewhere. So it creates for us that in cybersecurity, which is another conversation, I think. It creates almost a guaranteed work opportunity. So how to invite people into that is to show our kids in general this is technology, this is what it can do for us, this is how it makes the world better. Unfortunately, I think a lot of our kids see cell phones or mobile phones as the start and end of technology. And I would like to encourage a wider thinking. Bring technology into the schools. We must almost in a way flood our creches, if you like, with technology already. Let our young kids start to interact with screens and keyboards and whatnot, because that opens up the fact that it is there. It is in our world. Going into primary and secondary school, especially secondary school, tap into the creativity of our kids. Now, I know that the government's doing a lot of work around bringing robotics into school, and I think that's fantastic. I would like to open that up a little bit more by saying, let's talk about technology in general. Let's bring it into our communities. Let's bring it into our schools for our kids to directly interact with. Make it part of the curriculum, make it part of their learning experience, and so on and so forth. So for me then, in short, it's exposure. Put these things in our kids' hands. Let them interact with it. It's their generation. Who knows what things are going to look like 20 years from now. So let's prepare that already.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us on the Business Hour. Any closing remarks from your side on the topic?
Thank you so much for inviting me, but I think in the context of Women's Month, we have the opportunity to create invitational spaces in our conversations by, in part, asking this question about, should we not start to ask different questions? Should we not invite earlier so that we can create more diversity in our workplace? I'd like to see more young lady students in my university. I think it's interesting, it's important, and if there's any moms and dads listening to me, encourage your daughters to explore technology as a career.
Thank you so much to Dr. Jan Mentz, Academic Dean at Belgium campus iTversity. How are you creating or encouraging diversity in your workplace or business? Some words to chew on there from Dr. Jan Mentz. Now, this is the OFM Business Hour. It's gone 22 minutes after 6. Let's